Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sasha Star, and I have a show on Apple TV, Modern Investing. And special guest on the show is Shaquille Latimer, a friend of mine from Australia, believe it or not, although we spent a very good time in Toronto just recently. And I would like to invite him to the show where we will discuss economics to what is economics. It's a donut shop is economy, the Frankfurter School of Economic is economy, the Austrian school, here is Karl Marx school, and just name it. Everything we are going to discuss. And who will help us today is our friend Adam Lamprella. Welcome to the show, Adam. And of course, Mark Lee. Welcome to the show, Mark. And let's just hit it. Shaquille, I'll let you to start.
I think I might prefer to discuss what's the best vodka, as you and I shared a bottle in Toronto, because I can tell you that what you gave me was absolutely magnificent. So I look forward to having another one of those when I'm back. Um, I'd like to recap, if I can, just recap a couple of the issues I think that's been discussed by panelists on World Edition. It's been discussed by ourselves and also been discussed on Modern Investing, which is what is the optimum tax structure, the optimum tax rate, but especially coming into the American election. Um, from Here's how I read it, right? Trump's plan: let's cut taxes and regulations. The result of which will be to boost economic output, and that will support the whole economy. There'll be more jobs, etc., making life more affordable. Kamala
Are you
Harris's
talking
plan.
about trickle down economy?
Well,
Uh,
that was what we recapped on
okay.
Tuesday. Now, Kamala Harris's plan is let's increase taxes and increase government revenue, and as a result of doing that, we're able to spend more money, which means we can subsidise the middle class, we can help poorer people to get ahead, and we can relieve some of the cost of living pressures by actually being able to have government revenue be spent, as well as perhaps some level of price controls and going after big corporations for price gouging. Now, I tend to think that Donald Trump's plan, whilst I have some concerns with it, especially with tariffs, I tend to think that Donald Trump's plan would be the better one. I assume that you feel the opposite of that. But I think when we were discussing this the other day, you brought up the issue of trickle down economics. And I said, look, I think if you look at Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and all those sorts of things, it worked at the time. And I think you didn't quite agree on that. Also, you made the comment that Donald Trump's plans essentially redistributes wealth to the rich or to the wealthy. So I think that's where we disagreed. Is that an accurate starting point?
You know what? I don't recall disagreeing with you at all. We had a discussion. And first of all, I would like to know your opinion about US debt, which is now 35, 37 trillion dollars. Now, when Trump became president, it was 17, 18 trillion. And when he ended his 4 years, it was 25 trillion. Where is the surplus of the $7 trillion during the time first term? Obviously, because when he cut taxes primarily to 1% of rich people, corporations, but so much to rich people, that was the main cause of increasing so much the US deficit and debt. And speaking about trickle down economy, you know what? It during the you mentioned Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher time, uh, you're implying that the same mechanism which was successful then could be just as successful now. I have I have difficulties to accept this position because if you remember time of Ronald Reagan, I was much younger at the time. I was already in Canada, and I remember time when I had to renew my mortgage, and the rate was at that time, 1981, was 21%. How about that? And then it started slowly going coming down. So I remember time of Ronald Reagan fairly well. Um, and I want to tell you, it was in my opinion, was a fantastic time because the debt of the United States and Canada was negligible. It was something that, okay, there was debt, but nobody cared much about it. It's not same as today when US has to pay $1 trillion a year just to service the debt, if not more. So it's a different time, different geopolitical situation where there were, although there was still Soviet Union, empire, evil empire, and Warsaw Pact, or so on, but it was negligible because at that time, US and NATO countries, they were so much superior in any way you look. So it was again almost negligible. Okay, and by 3 or 4 years later, 1985, Gorbachev, glasnost, perestroika, and all of a sudden, the end of story. In 1991, there was no more Soviet Union. So it was a fantastic time in the history of US. Today is a different time. I'm not strong believer in trickle down economy because people who save millions, if not $10 million in taxes, you know what? I more believe that they will buy $500 million yachts to themselves and some other toys rather than create new businesses and create working high paid jobs for people or so on. You know what? You can tell it to somebody else, and I will not rain on your parade. If people will trust it and believe you, that's fine. I'm not going to be there. But don't tell that to me. I'm not a believer in trickle down economy. Period. But Shaquille, I don't
Well,
want to be forceful.
firstly, Sasha, I am going to bring you to Monaco the next time I go there and ask you to explain to all the yacht workers why you have such an opposition to the yacht industry and all of their jobs. I'm teasing you, my friend. Look, I can't obviously remember Reagan particularly well, given that I was born in December of 1983. So he was the president from the time that I was born to I think I was 5 or 6 or something. So I can't say I remember him, brilliantly. But look, does trickle down? The fundamental issue would be: does trickle down economics work? Well, I think that there's no provable answer here, right? A lot of the people that would suggest that trickle down economics worked very well under Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, etc. The Milton Friedman monetarist school of thought, the libertarian free markets, get government out of the way school of thought. Did it work? Well, I think it's easy to say that it did because of the great advancements in the economy during those years, but also interest rates started being brought down. So, maybe looser monetary theory, monetary policies helped. What I will say is it's important to compare, when we try to assess economics, is to compare one thing with another. Back in those times, tax rates were extremely high. They were 70 and 80 and 90%. So I think that reducing tax rates when rates are as high as that is going to have a buoyant effect on the economy. And I think that we have evidence to show that when you have tax rates that are too high, what that can do is it can stifle the economy. And the Laffer curve, Arthur Laffer, it's not just a Laffer curve in relation to taxation, but it's also about other economic conditions. However, let's say you went to a country like Ireland that has a 12.5% corporate tax rate. If they were to cut their tax rate by 30% and go from 12.5% to 9.5%, would that have a buoyant effect on the economy? Probably not. That's probably not going to make much of a difference, actually.
Oh,
A 30% tax cut when you've got a tax rate of 35% and you reduce it from 35 to 25, I think that's going to have a big effect. So I think that there's a level of taxation which is reasonable. To your point that the very wealthy might spend the money on frivolous pursuits such as buying a yacht, or we'll just take the money and invest it in something else, bonds or shares or whatever. And so therefore we're not going to see any kind of economic result. I think that is partially correct, but I think that there's a structural issue as well. The structural issue that I think people really need to pay attention is the overinvestment in non-productive assets. We're not seeing people invest in factories and equipment and things like that. We're seeing people and the wealthy, the private equity groups, we're seeing them snap up property. We're seeing them snap up not just commercial property, but residential property. And the thing that really concerns me is we're seeing a trend around the Western world of big corporations and the billionaires snapping up rural property, as in farming land. So, whilst you can make the argument that farming land does have some productive capacity, that's where we're seeing the money go. It's in those sorts of assets. We're not seeing the money go into, as I said, factory equipment or new farm equipment, that sort of stuff. That's a structural problem with where people are putting money and how they're allocating money, how they're able to obtain finance so they can leverage into things. I don't think that's an issue that's directly based on taxes. Now, to some degree, I think Donald Trump's tried to address that by threatening tariffs, by threatening, like, John Deere, if you move your factory and the jobs overseas, we're going to hit you with a 200% tariff, so you better leave them here. That's an attempt, I think, to increase investment into productive assets that leads to jobs. But to get to that core point, cutting taxes on the rich, one of the reasons I push back on that so much, especially when we're talking about the United States, is the United States tax system is so lopsided. They've got the most progressive tax rate that I'm aware of in the world. They've got too many different rates. And after doing that, they've got the lowest rate of tax as a percentage of the GDP of most other countries. So what you have in the United States is you've got the very poor that feel that the system is very unfair against them. You've got the middle class that feels that the system is unfair against them. And you've got the very wealthy that says, this is unfair, you're confiscating all our wealth. So you have to try to look at other countries and say, what is working elsewhere? What are the sorts of taxes the United States might be able to use to actually shore up their revenue? Now, we absolutely have to talk about spending, and the United States really does need to get a handle on its excessive spending. But if we leave the spending side of the ledger aside for a moment, the big issue is, how do they raise revenue? And I think that we can learn from other countries. Norway, for example, earns an enormous amount of money by taxing energy production from their hydro facilities. Now, that's a great idea. One of the downsides of it is that many of their waterways have all these little mini hydro facilities on them. But we can look at the Middle East. The Middle East says, I'm making some blanket statements here. The Middle East will say, if you pull the oil or gas or anything else out of our ground, here's our deal. You go and invest in it, you can get your money back, but once you've got your money back, we want 50%. It's a 50-50 deal, because that's what, it's the wealth of the common people. It's the wealth of our nation, everybody that should share in that wealth. I think that's perfectly reasonable. The United States certainly has oil. The United States certainly produces energy. So that could be something they could look at doing. I think the idea of just taxing the rich doesn't work. And the unfortunate thing is that whenever you try to cut taxes, the knee-jerk reaction that people have is, well, if you cut taxes across the board, it's disproportionately going to help the rich. But it's only disproportionately going to help the rich in the United States because they're disproportionately paying the taxes. And if the United States wants to live in the kind of society that we're used to, you've lived in Canada, obviously, for a very long time. I was born in Australia and I'm a British citizen. Accessible education, healthcare, working, functional infrastructure. Our roads are beautiful in America. They're not. You see the potholes, you know what it's like when you drive around into New York. The roads are just awful. So, I'm embarrassed for the United States when I see the condition of their infrastructure. If they want to have the sorts of things that we have, absolutely, they need to raise that tax from somewhere. But I don't think that they can just continue to tax the rich. And what they're suggesting, if you listen to some of the people on the left, is, well, maybe half isn't high enough. Let's go to 70%. Let's go to 90%. It didn't work in the past. It doesn't work now. I think they need to look at alternatives.
Shakil, I'd like to be a little bit more focused on the issues that we are discussing. It's difficult to prove that raising taxes is a good idea or a bad idea, or lowering the taxes is a good or bad idea. You have to be very focused on what period of time we are talking about, what particular situation we are discussing. Let's remember when Trump came to power in 2017. There were 8 years of Obama in power. Remember when Obama won the presidency, the economy was financial markets, they were in disarray. It was a fiasco of real estate, banking crisis, and so many, like Lehman Brothers, you may remember what's happened, and so on and on. And it was almost a last minute when U.S. Actually saved all the financial world system from complete collapse. I remember that time, and that's exactly what's happened. So Obama, he didn't have the great time when he became president. It was a difficult, very challenging time. But anyway, I'm not trying to say that thanks to Obama, America survived or the world survived. No, but at least he was not on its way to survival. So the America and all the world, they survived, number one. Then they started to exceed expectations. And by 2016, when Obama's second term was over, America and the world economy, they were doing quite well. It was not maybe brilliant, but it wasn't bad at all. So there was nothing, and Trump, by winning the presidency, controlling Senate, controlling the House, there was no need for him to do something extraordinary to fix it. You don't fix something that works. So at that time, America worked, and there was no need to fix something. So what he's doing, nevertheless, and I'm not criticizing him because he was in power, not me. So he had all apparatus of the United States, including, as I said, Senate and the House and everything. But what he could. So what he's doing, he's now lowering substantially taxes for super rich. Now, when U.S. government doesn't have that tax revenue, he needs to replace it with something in order for U.S. government to continue to function. So what U.S. government is doing is issuing bonds, T-bills, and everything else. And who are the buyers of these T-bonds and bills and everything else? Same rich people who now didn't have to pay taxes. So if somebody has $20 million that he had to pay in taxes but didn't, now for this $20 million, he can buy all these debt instruments of the United States. So how does it affect the rest of the population? Very simple, Shaquille. It's very simple. So before all this new phenomena happened, U.S. had 17, 18 trillion dollars worth of debt. So, okay, they have to service the debt, pay certain money and interest, or so on. So what he says, no. I want to give money to my friends. Here's the money, enjoy. Okay, you can buy T-bills, you can buy bonds, you can spend $500 million to buy a yacht. Oh, you don't have $500 million yet? Go and buy it right away. Okay, so they do all that, and all the population gets stuck. Instead of 17, 18 trillion dollars as before Trump, now when he left office, now it's $25 trillion. It's by far the biggest debt rise during any president of the United States of America. So much for trickle-down economy. I don't think that it's time for trickle-down economy. I don't believe that billionaire, no billionaire in his right mind will start build some factories or some some other things. Not that I'm not accusing them of being greedy. I think they're just pragmatic people. They've got so much wealth as they could think of. Why would they spend it on this stupid factory or something else? No, they're not going to do it. Buy T-bills. Of course, they will buy anything from U.S. government because they're buying it with their own tax government of U.S. money. Government says, okay, my friend, here's $20 billion. For $15 billion, you will buy our debt instruments, and $5 billion you spend on yacht and done deal.
All
So
right. So
simplistic.
I partially. Sorry, had you finished? I didn't want to cut you off. Have you
No,
finished?
no. It's probably simplistic, everything, but
So
it
look,
makes
I do partially agree with you. I think that you're overstating a few things. So let me come back to a couple of points.
okay.
So um, I don't think I know anybody with a net worth of more than 20 or 30 million that buys government bonds as their investment vehicle. And I think I know, top of my head, I think I know around 30 billionaires around the world. A couple of them are high profile. I'm not going to name them, but none of them that I know personally are just sitting back and just resting on their laurels and earning passive income. They all kind of work still, or their kids have taken over the businesses and they keep an eye on it. So I think that that's slightly overstating it. So when you say like, oh, they're going to go buy a $500 million yacht and all that sort of stuff, look, here's the thing: the very, very wealthy, and not just the very wealthy, even people like myself who are not in that category, but I earn reasonable money. There's been some years I've earned a few million. There's been other years where I've lost. As you well know, I've lost millions and millions and have been on my ass, and I'm like, what have I done? So somebody like myself, I'm going to pay attention to taxes. I'm going to pay attention to my structuring. And I've got the resources to make sure that I've got lawyers and accountants to make sure that I'm operating the most tax efficient way. That's what the very wealthy are doing. So tax cuts may not necessarily have the effect that you're attributing to the very wealthy. My concern is let's have a look at what we're actually talking about when we talk about the top 1% and the top 10%, because it's one thing to talk about billionaires and centimillionaires, but that's like the top 0.1%. Things are different in that world. When we're talking about somebody who, and somebody can fact check me or Google this for me in the background, please. I believe that the top 1% in the United States requires you to earn around $800,000 a year. To be in the top 10%, I think it's relatively low. I think it's only 250 grand or 300 grand, something like that, to be in the top 10%. So who are we talking about here? We're not going to be talking about athletes and celebrities, actors, singers, media personalities, all of that, because they're all contractors normally. They all effectively have their own business. So they already take advantage of certain tax schemes, and they've got, again, accountants, lawyers, all the rest of it. We're talking about people who maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a lawyer. Most lawyers won't earn $300,000 a year, but some do. So we're talking about those sorts of people. And actually, in the case of lawyers, they're generally going to have their own business. So same as doctors, but you don't see people getting paid $50 million a year in wages. That's not what we see. The wealthy don't do that. So having this really high tax rate on people that earn more than $10 million a year is something that people talk about a lot. But nobody earns $10 million. There's very few people that actually draw $10 million a year in wages. So that's my issue, is that we're actually hurting. Sorry, Mark?
I was just going to interrupt and give you that fact check, because I did look it up. In the United States as a whole, you need to earn nearly $788,000 to be in the top 1% of earners, and that's according to Smart Asset. To crack the top 5%, you'd have to take in at least $290,000, and the figures are estimates drawn from IRS data for individual filers.
And what's the top 10%? If it's 290 for top 5%, what's the top 10%?
Let me get to that and everything. But
So my figures are fairly close. I said 800 grand. You said it was 780. It's fairly close.
Right.
So my issue is that what you end up doing is you end up punishing and hurting people who actually are just high performing career people, right? Like there's not that many people out there that are earning that sort of money that don't have their own businesses or have their own investments elsewhere. So you're punishing the high earning doctor. You're punishing the guy who's an insurance salesman who works for a wage and gets commissions and has a really good year. They're the people that you're actually punishing. So,
Shakil, could you describe the punishment in this case? I would like.
You're punishing them by taking their money.
Punishment. Okay, what is the punishment?
You're punishing them by taking their money. Is what I'm getting at. But hang on, hold up. But here's the thing. The idea that cutting taxes the way that Donald Trump has done is just an unfair thing because it's helping the rich. I think the United States has to try to be competitive. Now, you've made the statement that, hey, there was nothing wrong with the US. The US was going along pretty well. The US was fine after Obama, so why did Trump need to come in and do all those things? Well, one, because that's what he went to the election with, right? He said that's what he was going to do. But two, and more importantly, because I think the United States needs to be competitive. We know that big tech companies like Google have moved their operations to Ireland. We know that big corporations are moving their operations, their licensing and things like that to Europe. They use the double Irish sandwich and all that sort of stuff with Irish and Netherlands. All that stuff. They're doing all of that largely because they're trying to reduce their taxation obligations.
Agreed.
So, well, that's what I would argue. They might argue it's for other reasons, but that's what I would argue. So there's a certain thing that you can't measure. What you can't measure is the businesses that never bothered to either start up or never bothered to come to the United States. And I would put myself in this category perfectly. You look at Canada. The corporate tax rate in Canada is something stupid, like 38% or something silly, right?
Yep.
But you've got the federal abatement. The federal abatement brings it down to 25%. If you're a small business, you get a standard deduction, whatever, brings you down to 9%. If you're a foreigner, however, that wants to start a business in Canada, you can have something like a limited partnership that doesn't need a general partner. Well, guess what? Your taxes are nothing because it's a look-through entity, etc. So you can see that what Canada is trying to do is it's trying to attract the international people who will say, actually, I'm not going to go and set up my office, my foreign office in New York or California. I'm going to go set up in British Columbia, or I'm going to set it up in Toronto, because I've got access to the US market because of the free trade agreement or the special agreement between Canada and the US, but I also don't have to pay taxes. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for the United States to say, we might need to deal with this actually. We might need to make ourselves a little bit more attractive, a little bit more competitive. The tax rate, the corporate tax rate at 35% in the US is substantially higher than Europe, substantially higher than most countries in Asia. And there's very few countries that have rates that are comparable. Australia, New Zealand, which are basically monopolies here and don't have to compete too hard. But Australia and New Zealand loses businesses to Singapore, a tiny country in the middle of nowhere, a barren rock. And look what they've created. Singapore is doing magnificently well. So I think the United States should be looking at their future and saying, what do we need to do? And just lastly, given the state of the US debt with 35 trillion or whatever it is that's on the books now, or the 18 trillion that was there when Trump got into office, and the fact that you've got, depending on who you ask, between 120 and 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, I don't think that anybody could sincerely tell you that the US has any intention of actually paying that debt down. Nor do I think they've got the ability to. But in their favour is the fact, or the projection, that their economy is going to grow significantly. At the moment, it's projected to hit 50 trillion in the next 10 years. So what they need to do is experience inflation and experience economic growth so that the debt levels become smaller and are actually manageable. And one thing is inflation, but the other thing is economic growth. And you need to drive economic growth somehow. I would argue that driving economic growth by trying to promote business and business people from around the world to locate their business operations in the United States is a good way of actually being able to drive that growth, as opposed to just rampant immigration, for example.
Just really quickly, and I'm loving this discussion y'all having, but just to add to it, Adam, I hate to say this, but because I know I'm not in that category and everything, but if I remember correctly from a past show, you said it, I think it was like around 70 or 80,000 that you were making or something like that. And so we don't qualify, and neither you do either. But I know that there's some professors, because I know some professors at Duke and UNC that apparently make, I think, close to 200,000, whether they deserve it or not, and everything. And that is what you need to have. Because to answer your question, Shaquille, how much you need to earn to be in the top 10% income bracket, a 2022 study by the Economic Policy Institute found that the top 10% of earners nationally receive an average income of $167,639 in 2021. So that's what you need to.
So if we're talking 170,000, that doesn't seem like it's that high to me. Maybe I'm out of touch. I'll accept that. But 170,000 doesn't sound.
Okay. Is that before taxes? 170,000 before
taxes. Before taxes, right?
So 170,000. We're talking, $3,500 a week. I'm not trying to say that's nothing, and for people that are struggling, that sounds like a lot of money. I'm not trying to be dismissive, and I know it might sound like I'm being a little bit out of touch, but that doesn't sound that outrageously high. The average wage in the US is 60,000. You're talking about 3 times the average wage. There's a lot of people that'll be able to get to that point, especially if they're professionals. That group of people, the top 10% of the country, are paying 90% of the taxes. As I said, how does the United States fix it? If your opinion, Sasha, is that any cut to taxes disproportionately helps the wealthy and that there is no positive thing that the economy benefits from as a result of those tax cuts, how does the United States fix it? And if you don't think it's a problem, if you think the United States should continue to be on the path that they're on, would you then advocate for Europe, the Nordic countries that you talk so highly of? Would the Nordic countries say our tax system's terrible, actually? What we should do is introduce the system they have in the United States? Adam, just do us a favour. When you're typing, we can hear it. So just mute yourself.
Can I ask you guys a question since you're the expert?
Absolutely.
So my question is this. In the United States, when people go to college, especially if they're middle class or lower middle class, they fund college by getting federal student loans that often amount to over $100,000. And if they go to graduate school, such as law school, they end up graduating with $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt when they're only in their mid-20s. How do you think the federal student loan program, which saddles students with this debt, affects economic growth and their ability to gain entry into the middle class, buy houses, spend money, and otherwise contribute to a robust economy?
I'll go to you, Sasha, first, because I've said a lot.
I have a great difficulties with the student's loan as a concept, because if you take a loan to start your own business, at least you control what you're doing, and if you're successful, it's great. If you're not successful, you'll declare bankruptcy and you'll try to start something else or get the job or something else. With a student loan, there are no guarantees that you will get indeed well-paying job. And even if you will get well-paying job, it does not guarantee how well it is indeed paying. So you will take care of your debt, and besides what I understand, it cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. So it stays with you for all your life. So it's a kind of almost like a slavery. And this is a horrible situation. I think out of 100 people who are taking students' loan, 5, maximum 10 people are doing a prudent thing and will benefit from it. The rest 90, they will just go into debt and for the rest of their lives the way it is now. And it's really horrible situation. That's my look at it.
So I'll come at it a little bit differently. I'd love for education to be accessible to everybody. I think it's important. However, I don't like most of the courses that are being taught at a tertiary level. I don't think that they obviously lead to a job. I think we've allowed a lot of subjects to be taught. Now, if you look at, like, for example, Australia, I think the US has a similar kind of program, and I think Canada has a similar sort of program, but I'll just focus on Australia for a moment. So when I was at university, I seriously contemplated joining the Navy. I wanted to join the Air Force, but the Navy had a better program. And the program basically said, after your first year, we will give you a wage and we'll pay off all of your X, is what it used to be called here, which is essentially a student loan thing. We'll pay it all for you. And what you owe us is 1 year for every year that we sponsored you through university. We'll cover your books, accommodation, etc., etc. You owe us 1 year of service for every year that we sponsored you, plus 1 additional year. If you did a double degree of 5 years and you got sponsored for 4 years, you would owe them 5 years. That's pretty reasonable. That's fair. However, I didn't pursue it for whatever reason I had. However, the notable thing with this program was you had to be studying something that they could actually use. So for me, I was doing economics, business, and was contemplating doing a double degree Bachelor of Laws. Now, as I said, I never ended up doing that, but that was what I was planning on doing. If private corporations were able to do that, they'd probably be quite happy to do the same thing. We'll help you, but you have to be doing a job that is actually going to be useful to us. if you want to go and do something for your own interests, for example, if you want to do, I always say things like feminist dance theory, but feminist dance theory isn't going to lead to a job other than maybe in academics where you can teach new people about feminist dance theory. It's not going to work very well. But there are also other subjects that are going to be difficult to get jobs in. And those subjects are things like English poetry and literature and history and, many of those cultural subjects. We do want those people to exist, don't we? I do. I think it's important that they exist. I think if you think about something like, astronomy and, theoretical physics and things like that,
How about
something like
Hungarian poetry? Would you like to do that?
Exactly. But I think if you look at someone like Stephen Hawking's, genius, very, very smart guy, obviously came up with all sorts of wonderful ideas, but was he, forget about his disability for a moment, was he really employable in any other kind of field outside of academics? So probably not. So you still want those people to exist, and you still want those people to drive those academic achievements. But there's a lot of subjects that it's very hard to see what the value is. So, if I can just finish. So, what I would say is that, one, we need to curtail students that are enrolling in programs where there is not an obvious job at the end of it, that they're going to be able to earn more. Because the old adage was, if you've got a tertiary qualification, you'd be able to earn more. You're going to end up being much wealthier than the everyday person, so therefore you should be able to pay back your student loans. That, I think, is reasonable, but that's not what's happening. Secondly and lastly, if we are going to give student loans to students who are in academics, we should also be prepared to give people a $200,000 loan if they've gone to trade school and become a plumber or an electrician or a mechanic or a whatever, so that those people can say, hey, I've got $200,000 here. I can now go and buy my own truck and my own equipment and my own et cetera, and I can start a business. And I would dare suggest that in today's world, if you actually gave those trade people the same sorts of funding you give to students, they would probably have a better and bigger economic impact on the country than what a lot of academics do. And I mean, no disrespect to academics, but that's
I agree with that.
Just really quickly, because this action, and I'd love to hear Adam's thoughts as well. So if I'm hearing you correctly, because part of this is an economic discussion about trickle down and all along those lines and everything, there are, the field that I am in, there are very few people who would crack the top 10%. There might be one or two, maybe at Fox and MSNBC, but the average salary of journalists is somewhere between 40 to 120,000, something like that. And I have a great deal of respect. Maybe y'all don't, but I'm a student of history and everything along those lines. So I have a great deal of respect for those that are willing to do archaeology. Archaeologists make no money. They make between $42,000 to $75,000 a year and everything. So they're not going to crack the top 10%. That's not happening if you're making that kind of money. So are you saying, the two of you, Sasha and Shaquille, that that those careers shouldn't exist at all? Because I mean, part of archeology is studying.
That's not saying it. That's really me.
Well, I said I'm not saying that's both of you.
But I'm not saying that at all. Let me put it to you. Let me put it to you this way, right? My great love was acting. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an actor. Okay.
That's what you're doing now.
Now, the overwhelming majority of actors don't get anywhere, right? And I thought, well, I don't really want to be a waiter and just serving people coffees in a restaurant while I'm waiting for my big break. So I didn't pursue it. Maybe I should. I still sort of flirt with the idea. That's why I know people in Hollywood, because I still flirt with the idea. Yeah, I'm going to be in a movie, right? But let's come to something else. Let's come to something that I really do enjoy. I enjoy chess. Now, I may not have the talent. Maybe I do. I don't know. But let's assume that I do have the talent, but don't have the knowledge. So if I spend the next 5 years of my life studying at the same sort of intensity that I would be studying if I was at university, and I just studied chess, right? Managed to make myself a master's chess player. And then I borrow $200,000 from the government to do it. What do I do with that qualification? At best, maybe I can win in competitions, but at best, maybe I can set up a chess school and try to earn money from that. What I'm trying to get at is, you can have your passions. That's fine. I wanted to be rich. Okay, I don't consider myself to be rich, but I know a lot of you guys do. But that's all I wanted. And so I decided the best way to do it would be to study money itself. And that's why I got into banking and finance and trading in the first place, because I thought that that would be the secret sauce. And you know what? It wasn't actually. It wasn't, because most stockbrokers are shit at trading. All they are overblown salespeople. So I've had to make certain decisions through my life to help me to be able to earn the sort of money that I have earned. And I can tell you, for the first 35 years of my life, I didn't make anything. I was broke. I had a few wins along the way, but I was broke. I'm borrowing money against a house and this and that, lost relationships and, like behind in my car payments and having to look at my electricity bill and go, oh, shit, I've over budgeted this, I've overspent on this thing, and, I've got a warning letter, they're going to cut my power off. Like, that's how my life was. It was terrible, but that was a decision I made because I was chasing a dream. What I'm saying is, if you're chasing a dream that you want to go and do something like archaeology, which I absolutely agree with you, we do need those people. We absolutely do. But on the same token, don't sit there and say to me that you wanted to go and look at dinosaur fossils. And so therefore, the guy who's a lawyer, who's working 16 hours a day on a death row case, who manages to earn $500,000 that particular year, that he's got to give up half his income because you want to go out and look for dinosaur shells and the dinosaur skeletons, and the world's unfair. Yeah, the world's unfair, but you've got a choice. You're trying to do the thing that you enjoy as opposed to doing the things that you don't. I got here because I had to do a whole heap of things that I don't enjoy doing.
No, Shaquille, I've actually got to tease you. Number totally over deep back Sasha and everything. I've actually got to tease you, and I'm just going to bring up something that some of my friends might not like me bringing up and everything. But ironically, in the African American community, those that are probably coming closer to the 10% are in two jobs that I would never want to do and everything. And I'm going to tell you why I wouldn't want to do them. But if you study Black Wall Street or any of the history of those that are wealthy and everything, a lot of people make a lot of money and some very good money by dealing with death. Funeral home directors make a whole lot of money and everything.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to deal with that field. And I also know a lot of women that make some pretty good money, including being millionaires and probably making it in that top 10%. But I don't have that skill. I need a beard cut as it is right now and everything. But so I don't have the skill necessary. And also I'm not trying to deal with all them chemicals. But beauticians and barbers make a whole lot of money, probably cracking that 10% that we're talking about.
So as for funeral homes, unfortunately, it's a growth industry at the moment, so it's a pretty good investment. I do want to come back, though, to trickle-down economics, because that was, I think, the core issue here with taxes that Sasha and I were discussing. So, Sasha, just to come back to that specifically, I'm not necessarily saying, hey, let's just cut taxes and, hey, you know what we should do? We should increase taxes on the poor. We should increase taxes on the middle class. And on the wealthy, we should reduce their taxes to zero because, hey, if you believe in trickle down, that would be the logical thing that you would do, right? You would say, listen, if you earn $500,000 a year, you've got to pay 50% in tax. But if you earn $500 million a year, we're going to make your tax rate zero because it'll all trickle down. That would be the logical, progression there. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is that the tax system in the United States is inefficient. It's unfair because it treats people in similar economic conditions totally differently. And what they should be doing is looking at alternatives. So I talked about before resource taxes, things like that. I talked before about, in other shows, I've talked about broadening the tax base. Now, the United States isn't really a country that can easily have a sales tax, but those sorts of things, sales taxes, those indirect taxation things, I think that would work very well. And I think it's very well worth looking at the Nordic countries if what you want to do is have a country that has the same sort of social services that's provided by by those Nordic countries, so that Adam can sit there and say, you know what, I don't have this big debt hanging over my head, and I'm not sitting there teaching these beautiful young people with eyes of excitement and wonder about the future, only to see them graduate, and as soon as they throw their hat in the air, they get a big debt land on their head. Absolutely. But if you want to have that sort of society, and we all, I think, want to live in a fairer place and a more equal place where people have the opportunity to live to their full potential, the tax system the United States doesn't do that. And we know it doesn't do it because it's never done it. We need to look at alternatives.
Sales tax exists in Canada for as much as I can remember. Right now it's 13%, which is combined federal and provincial tax. So that is additional taxation, but however, it's fair because the more you're buying things and consuming things, so the more you pay taxes. People who don't buy things, so they pay less taxes. That's logical, in my opinion. Now, concerning back to students' loan, I think there is a big disconnect that you see, you're taking students' loan to complete university studies, but you're not taking it from university. You're taking it from financial institution, which is associated with university. And now what's happened, university teaches you a little bit of this, a little bit of that, the racial studies, and who knows what you want to learn in university. They don't care because they know that there's 200,000 or so dollars you will owe to financial institution, because if you would owe it to university, you would go to university and say, what you taught me for 5 years, now I cannot find gainful employment because of the garbage that I have to study because of you. Now they can say, oh, you're not happy with what we taught you? Go and find another university.
But that's my point.
There to pay anyway.
But that's my point exactly. So the reason that I actually withdrew or dropped out, if you want to call it that, from university was I needed the qualifications and the qualifications for licensing that would give me the ability to trade financial instruments and deal financial instruments to clients. That's a 3-year degree, but I could go to the Australian Financial Markets Association and the Securities Institute of Australia, as it was called at that time, and I could do a very quick course. And the course itself was actually a similar length. It was a couple of years, but if you knew what you were doing, you could just test and prove your competency. So I was able to do that. Then I did my postgraduate diploma, which is the equivalent of a university degree by Australian standards, which is why I can now go and do a master's or do a master's transition to a PhD if my thesis is good enough, that sort of stuff, which I've considered doing. But then I ask myself, is it worth me doing it? Same thing with being an accountant. Because of the life experience that I've got now and the business experience I've got now, if I wanted to be an accountant, what would I want to be? Well, I wouldn't want to be doing a tax return. I'd probably want to be a management accountant. So do I go and do a 3-year degree, Bachelor of Accounting, or do I go to something like the SIGMA, the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, which would give me automatically CPA and CA qualifications in almost every country in the world, which I can do in 12 months. Is that a better option for me? What we're seeing at university level is that they're fluffing things. Just very quickly say this last thing. So I looked at, should I consider doing an actuarial course? Because I do have the qualifications and life experience already that I could do one. Should I consider doing it? It's held in very, very high esteem. But I balk at that because I'm like, well, what job is that going to lead me to that I'm going to want to do? Because I don't work now. So how is this going to help me? But anyway, I looked into the course after we were talking about it with David M. Walker. So I looked into the courses here in Australia. I said, I wonder actually what I would need to do if I did want to do it. Maybe I should do it part-time, for fun in the background. Well, guess what? The first module was Indigenous Studies. Why? If you're a student that is into that, you're probably a nerd. You're probably not going to be as eccentric as me. You're probably a maths nerd, a chess player. That's where your focus is in. You're not focused on, a sociological issue, but they made that the first module that you have to do. Now, I was peeved when I was doing my financial qualifications at the Australian Financial Markets Association that the first module I had to do was an insurance, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do derivatives and other, and equities trading, but I had to do insurance. Now, funnily enough, it's actually helped me later on in my life. But if I'm peeved at having to do that, because it wasn't directly what I wanted to study, but I just had to suck it up, how peeved would I be, or other students be, if they've got to do some sociological thing, race relations, or this or that, when what you're trying to study has nothing to do with that? Does make sense.
But hold on a second.
Let Sasha go, because I don't want it to be a debate. Let Sasha go, please.
The last thing what I wanted to mention is that there must be some kind of harmonious way of relationship between university, financial institution that loads $200,000 to a student, and student and his parents themselves. So let's see, as somebody, a student completed university, cannot find gainful employment. So therefore, he cannot making payments on his loan. So there must be a meeting between university, financial institution, and a student, and figure out how to help student to find gainful employment. Maybe he needs some additional courses. Maybe he needs some private coaching in order to be more successful in finding the job. So there has to be responsibility not with the student, but with university and financial institution, and try to help to solve the problem instead of saying, "Oh, give me $200,000. Oh, you can't pay. Okay, just go. You're broke.
Uh,
Just go to hell."
Okay, but somebody has to pay for these qualifications, and I don't think it's fair to say to the doctor who's earning $800,000 a year that, hey, you spent, you did 4 years of pre-med, then you did another 4 years to get your MD qualification. Then you had to get qualifications and experience. So you were attached to a hospital at very, very low pay and very, very high long hours. So you've pretty much spent your 20s. Now you want to specialize and become a heart surgeon or a neurosurgeon or whatever. So that's going to be another 6 years, 8 years. So now you're 40 or 45. You've spent 20 years studying. You haven't really earned huge wages. You've been worked to death, right? And now you're earning 800,000 a year. Well, guess what? We want to take half of that because that other kid decided he wanted to go and study whatever subject, right? And he can't get a job, or now he's going to go work at Starbucks. I don't think that that's fair. But let me talk more about. We might have to have another show because I don't think we've covered everything. But let's just talk about this. Let me paint a picture for you, and the specifics is going to be a bit hazy. But let me just paint a picture. If you could combine different tax systems around the world and apply them to the United States, and let's assume that they would work, right? Let's assume that you could raise exactly the same level of revenue that is currently being raised by the United States system today. And what you did was you had a system of a national sales tax. You had a resource tax, as I've described before. You had some level of poll taxes, and the rest was in indirect taxes like excise taxes on fuel, on cigarettes and alcohol, and things like that. And in order to help the poor, because that's going to be regressive, what you would do is you would make the benefit system regressive. So you would help people at the bottom. They would get bigger subsidies than what the very wealthy would. If that was the system and it generated the same, I would argue it would generate more, but let's just say that it generated the same percentage as a percentage of the GDP of the United States as what is currently being raised. Wouldn't that be a better system than having the system the United States has got now? And if you would be suggesting that tax rates could go up, the marginal rates of tax should go up in order to bring in more revenue, wouldn't it be better to introduce a national sales tax? Forget about the politics, assume it could be done. Wouldn't that be a better alternative? Or do you think that the current system could be enhanced the way it is?
You know what? Something else. There is such a divide between Republican and Democrats in the United States that regardless who will become a president, especially if Trump will become president, I think it will lead to states take more governmental functions in their own hands. It will start with abortion, which is already the case, and it will go much farther than just abortions. So there will be a huge development of state-run tax collections and many other functions, including probably the medicine and medical appointments and medical management and so on. I think US is two huge countries, so from one point elsewhere, say Washington, all countries being run from Washington. The states are so different. The fabrics of each state is so different. So I think it's impractical. Even Canada, which is 10 times smaller country, I mean by population than the United States, as economy is 10 times smaller. And there are provinces have a lot to say how things are run in Canada.
Look,
And
I think that's a slightly different argument than the question I asked you. However, when it comes specifically to the United States, I actually agree with that. I think it would be far better for the federal government to say to the states, we are going to tax you X percentage of the GDP of your state. How you guys go and collect it, it's up to you. Because I think if you really think about the United States, it's not really one country, or it shouldn't be. It's kind of 50 countries that are in a common union. That's kind of how it is. And I think that would be a more efficient thing, because then the states compete and people can have different tax systems. But to specifically talk about tax, let's take New Zealand prior to COVID. So New Zealand has no capital gains tax and a flat rate of tax. They tax at 30%. Compare it to Australia. Australia had a much more progressive system. They've changed it now, where they've got I'm not even sure what the middle rate is. I think it's 30%, and they've got top rate of 45%. Plus, they've got capital gains tax. Australia also has a 10% goods and services tax, so essentially a consumption tax. New Zealand has a 15% consumption tax. Australia raises around 27 to 28% of its GDP in taxes. New Zealand raises 33%. Who's got the better tax system? New Zealand's system, and by the way, New Zealand politically is on the left of Australia. But when it comes to their tax system, I would suggest that their tax system is far easier, it's far simpler, and it actually raises more. And I do want to, because I'm cognizant now that we've almost at the hour, so if I can just very quickly talk about Sweden. So Sweden's tax system has essentially three rates. It's 0, 30, and 55%. Okay? But to be at the top tax rate, you only have to earn 1.5 times the average wage. The average wage in the United States is $60,000, so 1.5 times means you're at 90. So $90,000, everybody at 90,000 above are paying 55% in taxes. And when you look at their corporate tax rate, 20% or 20.5%, when you have a look at their capital gains tax, 30%, and they've got around a 30% sales tax. So that does sound very, very high, and they raise around 44%, I think, GDP in taxes. However, the reason why the people are more agreeable to pay it is a couple of reasons. One, it's because they have a lot more direct benefits to themselves. So the person at 90,000 who's paying that tax has got childcare and healthcare and all those sorts of things. So that's why they're happy to pay it. Two, because the very, very wealthy in Sweden have ways of being able to reduce their taxes, which are written in to the Swedish tax code. For example, people who trade shares are able to access a special kind of account where they basically pay a 1 or a 1.5% tax rate, regardless of whether or not they've made or lost any money. It's called an ISK account. So they will pay 1.5%. It's 30% of the risk-free rate. They pay that, and there's no capital gains, and it's in their name. Beautiful system. So the very wealthy are able to take advantage of other types of things. The very wealthy that want to invest in a business are able to do so and are able to employ people and fire people far more easily, because it's not going to be devastating to a person's life if they lose their job because of the social benefits, which makes Sweden quite an attractive place to actually go and start a business. They don't promote that as much as they should, but they really should promote it because it's actually a really business-friendly location. What I'm saying is that the United States needs to do things to make itself more competitive. And I appreciate your concerns with Donald Trump's tax cuts and that it's disproportionately helping the wealthy. And I accept what you're saying to a degree, but I don't think that the alternative, which is increase the corporate rate of tax back to 28%, as Kamala Harris is suggesting, and increasing marginal rates of tax on earned income, or introducing an unrealized capital gains tax or a wealth tax, is the solution. I think the solution has to be a broader system and a more indirect system.
Agree, Shakil. I think that hopefully next time we'll discuss different alternatives. And don't forget about old friend Karl Marx, because he had his own views on how things should be run.
That's a 5-hour show, isn't it? Just you and me for 5 hours discussing Karl Marx and Lenin. So we've got to go to world politics. I will see you there in a few minutes.
Okay, and I will bring a bottle of vodka for our next show. Okay?
Sounds good.
You better.
Thank you, Shakil. Mark, thank you very much.